Can you cry in prison? My name's Jesse, and I spent 19 years in Virginia prisons. And people have this idea of this tough, constant battle and tattooed and wielding knives at all times. And maybe it's like that somewhere. Maybe there's some prison in Siberia or in some other state where things are just constant warfare. But the reality is that people in prison are just trying to live their lives. Now, sometimes there is a war, sometimes there's activity, sometimes there's peace. But what I found is I learned more about strength and about courage from people inside than I had ever learned on the outside. And that's not meant to glorify it. It's not a good place. I'm not saying it was the best, but I did see the best of humanity and the worst. And so when I think about toughness, when I think about courage, I think about the guy that I watched lose his grandmother. And I watched him cry and cry openly and not try to hide it, and not try to explain it, or not feel like he had to justify it to anybody else, because he inspired me. Because he was someone people looked up to because of his kind of criminal or his gang associations. He was someone who was respected. And what I saw was someone who wasn't afraid of the fact that he was grieving, who wasn't afraid of the fact that he was struggling. And that inspired me. I was like, man, if he can do it, like maybe I can do it. Like maybe I don't have to worry about being so tough all the time. Because when I look back at the good and the bad, the first fight I got into in prison, I almost got killed. And it was because I felt like I had to set an image. I had to be tough. I had to stand up. And yeah, I did have to stand up for myself, but there was a way to do it and there was a way not to do it. And I picked the very wrong way. Because as I learned, the guy who's barking the loudest, the guy who's making the biggest scene, that's not the guy you got to worry about. That's not the tough guy. The guy who's tough is the one who is calmly and quietly explaining to you why this is not okay and why it's not going to continue. So what I found was people being genuine and people being strong and people being courageous was not about trying to make a scene. It wasn't about trying to fake something. It wasn't about trying to intimidate something. It was being honest. It was saying, I'm really effing angry right now. Like, we need to talk about this. Or, yo, stay away from me. Like, we can settle this later. Or whatever it was. But I found that being genuine and being the person that is right there, is real, is open, that's what the strength looked like. And the thing that I learned from that was that all the putting on airs, all the pretending, all the everything, that's really just from a place of insecurity. And then I began to realize I could be who I wanted to be. I could admit that I liked Taylor Swift, that I did, whatever. It allowed me to be in a position where people could joke, but they joked in a playful way. They didn't joke in a demeaning way. It was when I was trying to pretend that people would pray. It was when people were trying to be something they weren't that they would end up being a victim. So learning that I could be the person that I am gave me kind of the courage. And what I realized is in all that fear, I was running from being afraid of who I was, or I was running from being, thought that I would be seen as something other than what I was. And what prison taught me is you don't have to be any one thing. You just have to be who you are. And the more you can embrace that, whether you're 7 foot tall or 3 foot tall, whether you know how to fight or you don't, the more you embrace that, the more respect you'll get. And so I tried to lead with who I was. I tried to not hide it. I tried to not diminish it. I tried to be who I was. And doing that allowed me to be in a place where I was comfortable. So then getting out into the world, I tried to have the same mindset. Because I worried if people would judge me, if they would accept me, like, would the neighbors even want me around? I mean, I'm a violent criminal, I'm a dangerous person. But what I found is I just tell people who I am, I tell people where I came from, and I tell people what I'm doing now. And some people may judge me, but in person, I have never had a single person basically tell me you're not good enough, or tell me, oh, you're a problem, or I don't want to be around you. Because I think people respect the honesty. And I think the honesty allows people to recognize, hey, people can change. And hey, maybe I can be a little more honest with myself. Maybe I don't have to hide my flaws. Maybe I don't have to control this image so much. But it's been really gratifying. And it's been the moments where I've had that thought in the back of my mind. I remember when I was coming back from Boston, I was on the plane next to this woman who was very nicely dressed, looked very formal, and I was thinking God, she's probably not gonna understand. If this comes up, I may not mention it, but it came up in conversation, I mentioned, and she says, oh, you should talk to my daughter. She was teaching writing classes down in Georgia prisons. Now she works for a nonprofit that deals with getting people jobs after incarceration. So in that moment, I had this prejudice, I had this fear, and that's the thing that we get into. We can't indulge that because it's gonna pop up in the back of our mind. We're gonna fear, exposing ourselves or being who we are. The other night I went to an event and there was a very nice guy who was a lawyer. He had been in the military. He was very formal. Again, I told him who I was. We had a great conversation. He and his wife, we shared our stories. But again, just not letting that fear prevent me from being who I am. Not allowing it to allow me to feel a sense of shame or feel like I need to hide or change who I am, because I can't change the past. I can only change who I am today. And the only way to do that is start with being honest about where I've been and where I'm going.